Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, I am sad to say that my speech is not as inspiring. In fact, it's in a sense de-inspiring. As you can tell from the title, Fear is a Bad Counselor. No, that was not by Sigmund Freud, who was alive at the time, but by a peer of his, an Austrian diplomat, in July 1914, which is known to historians as the July Crisis. And if you go on the next page, the event I'm talking about is World War I. General belief, probably what many of us believed or were taught, is that the assassination of the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, on June 28 was what sparked, so to speak, or ignited this conflagration. And the nations, in a sense, just inevitably slid into war without really wanting it. But here's the question, among others. If that's the case, why did the war begin almost a month later if it was not a knee-jerk reaction to a beloved man? Or at least one of the heirs to the throne. And the theory is that it was sparked by pre-war alliances. Austria declared war on Serbia. Russia had to support Serbia. Germany had an alliance with Austria. France had an alliance with Russia. They all kind of just fell in like a house of cards, and Great Britain got drawn in because of its treaty with Belgium, which Germany invaded. But if you look at the pre-war alliances, first of all, they're all defensive. And Great Britain, by the way, its only alliance, formal alliance, is with Japan. Ottoman Turkey was an enemy of Russia but had an alliance with no one. Romania was secretly allied to Germany but didn't join in. And by the way, so was Italy, but they too sat on the sidelines. So the idea that nations were forced by the conditions of their alliances, or maybe because of their mobilization plans, does not really hold up underwater. So we go to why were there alliances? Well, really, why do we make alliances with friends? Well, not us, but countries. We make alliances with friends because we get along, but countries make alliances for common goals or common fears. And the alliance here in question, Austria and Germany, that was a common fear of Russia, with which they shared a border. At the same time, France, which had lost to Germany in 1870, they made an alliance with Russia to encircle Germany because France could not stand up against Germany. So you have basically Austria and Germany versus France and Russia. So where does Serbia come in? Serbia is in the area known as the Balkan Peninsula. And at that time, Austria and Russia were vying for influence in the Balkan area. The Habsburgs, the Austrians, had been there for quite a while, but the Balkan people, the Serbians, the Bosnians, Bulgarians, Romanians, so on, they're Slavic people, which makes them, in a sense, more aligned towards Russia. And then there's a racial element. The Teutonic race, which is the Germans and the Austrians, feared the Slavs, which is Russia and basically the Balkan people. So then we go to the war plans. As I mentioned, Germany was encircled or felt encircled by France and Russia. So if there was war, the Schlieffen Plan, which is originated in 1906 and revised several times, was a preemptive strike against France first, because they had beaten France before. They believed they could do it. In fact, they felt they had to do it in 42 days, 7 weeks, because that was the time when Russia would have completed its mobilization. So it was sort of a 1-2 punch. They felt they could they had to knock out France first before turning to the much larger Russian army. France, of course, counted on Russian support for that. But Russia, if it was attacked, remember it's a defensive alliance, they wanted France to attack, so that Germany would find itself split. Then, of course, you got Austria counting on Russia. So where does the assassination come in? Well, Ferdinand was not a beloved man. On the day he was killed, Vienna went on as usual. He was unpopular. And a lot of the ministers were actually glad to be rid of him because Franz Ferdinand, ironically, did not want war with Serbia. So in a sense, he was out of the way, as Count Berchtold said, to give them a final and fundamental reckoning with Serbia. And Count Berchtold was the foreign minister. And he was not the only one. The Germans felt the same way. You see Wilhelm von Moltke, who was the army chief of staff in Germany, and Bethmann Hollweg, who was the chancellor. And by the way, when Helmut says we are ready and the sooner the better for us, he's actually speaking about Russia. Because Serbia meant nothing to the Germans. It was Russia they were concerned about, whereas Austria was concerned about Serbia. Now the person who shot Ferdinand, he was a Bosnian Serb, but he was not in Serbia. He was in Bosnia, which is part of Austria. So he was basically an Austrian citizen. Despite that, Austria, they basically said it's a conspiracy theory. They accused the Serbian government, gave them a 48-hour ultimatum. Or as Berchtold said, a note with a time limit. But the political and ruling elites of Europe, they knew what it meant. They knew that, in effect, it was a pretext for war. Lord Grey, by the way, was the foreign minister of England, and Sazonov was the foreign minister for Russia. They didn't know what it meant. In fact, the Serbians knew too, because on July 25, they began to mobilize even before they replied. Now, their reply was conciliatory in nature, and they accepted all the points except for one. Nevertheless, the Austrian diplomat, Count Geislingen, he rejected it, burned their documents in the office in minutes, closed the embassy, and was across the border in an hour. In other words, the Austrians had already planned to refuse the Serbian reply. And then the Austrian army began mobilization. Russia had to stand by its Serbs, so they began a period preparatory of war, which is pre-mobilization. In other words, they were trying to intimidate the Austrians to stop their actions before declaration of war. What they didn't know was the Austrians already had tacit understanding of German support. At this point, the rest of Europe is starting to wake up to what's really going on, the diplomatic crisis. Lord Grey proposes a conference, but the Germans and Austrians rebuff them because they plan to attack Serbia before and overrun quickly before the rest of Europe can come to their action, to their help. So Austria declares war, as Berchtold himself said, in order, quote unquote, to cut any attempts at mediation, his own words. Russia, therefore, seeing that Austria called its bluff, they go into partial mobilization, which is along the Austrian border. And at this point, Wilhelm, the Kaiser of Germany, and Nicholas exchanged a series of telegrams in English. And why English? Because, as some of you may know, they are cousins, royal cousins, through Queen Victoria, which also makes George V, King of England, was also their cousin. And as you see, some of the remarks on July 29 to 30. But despite that, they are facing pressures from their cabinet, from their ministers, in the interest of their nation. Russia goes to general mobilization, which now means troops mobilizing along the German border. So Germany, which has been portrayed as a villain, at this point they're actually the only ones who have not yet mobilized. So Wilhelm refuses general mobilization, but he orders a state of danger of war, which means that they would mobilize within 48 hours. That's why you had the ultimatums to Russia and France with 12 to 18-hour limits. Of course, the French refuse. Joffre, by the way, is the French chief of staff in the army. At this point, France is the only one that hasn't mobilized. And mobilization, by the way, with huge armies of 1 million men, the example that's been used is someone drawing a gun. It's not shooting, but whoever draws first, in a sense, has the upper hand. So France refuses the request by Joffre to mobilize. Churchill sends an alert to the Royal Navy. You see tensions are escalating. The hours expire, and Germany declares war on Russia. France doesn't do anything, sitting on the sidelines, because they want to get assurance that Britain will get involved. It doesn't matter, because when Germany invades Belgium and Luxembourg, then Britain, by its pledge to uphold Belgian neutrality, then sends an ultimatum to Germany. So at this point, you can see the cards falling into play. Just as we noted, Germany invades Belgium, declares war on France, then Britain declares war the next day. So did the nation slide into war? No. In any step, there was countless missteps along the way, from Austrian blatant ultimatum, Russia's mobilization, pre-mobilization, Germany's various ultimatums. Because at this point, Germany was at war with all the other countries. Don't go to war unless they feel, after a cost-benefit analysis, that it is something